A pale dawn crept across the sky above Windsor, washing the castle's spires in a light too fragile to warm the stone. Inside those echoing halls, men of title murmured over their tea and women whispered behind their fans. Their words, laced with sympathy and malice, floated through corridors like perfumed ghosts. "The Duke of Wessex," they said, "will die without an heir. His line ends with him." It had been 10 years since the death of Lady Charlotte Whitmore, yet the tragedy clung to her widower like frost that would not melt. Lord Sebastian Whitmore, Duke of Wessex, was once the embodiment of English grace, an accomplished horseman, a scholar, a soldier of quiet distinction. Now he stood alone in the corner of royal gatherings, a figure carved from ice, his silence mistaken for pride, his sorrow mistaken for arrogance. At the christening of the prince's new son, Sebastian endured the gathering as he might a funeral. Courtiers glanced his way with a mixture of pity and amusement. One lady murmured, not quietly enough, "The man blessed with everything but fruitfulness." The king's brief nod across the room was courteous yet cool, the gesture of a monarch already turning his favor elsewhere. Sebastian's jaw tightened. He bowed his head slightly, concealing the flicker of rage behind civility. The orchestra swelled, laughter rose, and the Duke of Wessex departed before the champagne reached his lips. Back at Wessex Manor, the air seemed colder, as if the house itself mourned. The portraits of Whitmore's past gazed down from the walls with judgmental calm. Men with heirs, women with roses in their arms. The Duke's boots echoed through marble corridors that had not heard a child's laughter in a decade. Servants lowered their voices when he passed, speaking of his misfortune as though it were a haunting. Some said the late Duchess's spirit still lingered, mourning the child she could not bring into the world. Others claimed the Duke had been cursed by the Almighty himself for arrogance known only to kings. It was on such a day, amid December fog and silent servants, that Miss Eleanor Hart arrived at Wessex Manor. Her carriage was modest, her attire plain, but there was a quiet dignity in the way she stepped down onto the gravel. She was not yet 30, though grief and poverty had etched shadows at the corners of her eyes. Once, she had been the daughter of a respected Cambridge scholar. Now she was the daughter of a disgraced one. Her father's writings, philosophical, questioning, too bold for the comfort of the crown, had ended his career and forced Eleanor into service. Yet she carried herself with the composure of one who had learned that humility, when worn well, can look very much like grace. She came to Wessex to serve as governess to the Duke's young niece, a lonely child left in his guardianship. The steward, a man named Hargreaves, received her with cautious politeness. "His Grace is not fond of disturbances," he warned, leading her through endless corridors lined with somber portraits and extinguished lamps. "You will keep to the schoolroom and the nursery. His Grace seldom entertains company." Eleanor nodded, her gloved hands clasped before her. She was accustomed to silence. She had lived most of her life inside it. Her first sight of the Duke came unexpectedly. As she entered the grand library, a cathedral of dust and forgotten light, he was already there, standing by the hearth with a book open in his gloved hand. The flames painted him in amber and shadow. His face was not cruel, as gossip had suggested, but it bore the weary stillness of a man who had spent too long conversing only with his own ghosts. When he looked up, their eyes met, hers wide with surprise, his narrowed in polite appraisal. "You are Miss Hart," he said, his voice deep, refined, and carefully measured. "Yes, Your Grace. I arrived not an hour ago." He studied her for a moment that felt too long. "You may find Wessex an unkind place in winter. Few visit, fewer stay." "I have no cause to fear solitude, my lord," she replied softly. "It is often a more honest companion than society." A faint spark, almost a smile, touched his mouth, gone as quickly as it came. "Then we are kindred in that regard." He closed his book and gestured toward the shelves. "The child's education is of some importance. My late wife valued refinement. You will find her journals in that cabinet. They may guide your lessons." Eleanor curtsied. "I shall honor her wishes." When she lifted her gaze, he was already turning away, the faint scent of parchment and cedar lingering in his wake. She exhaled slowly, unsure whether she had impressed or unsettled him. Perhaps both. In the days that followed, she taught the little girl to read, to paint, to dance to the rhythm of falling rain. Her laughter, bright and rare, began to echo faintly through the stone corridors. The Duke would sometimes pass the nursery door and pause. He never entered, but Eleanor often felt his presence before she saw him. An unspoken warmth in the air, a silence that listened. Whispers began to stir among the servants. "The governess has brought life to the manor," one said. "The Duke lingers where her voice is heard," said another. The cook, a kindly woman, warned Eleanor gently, "Be cautious, dear. The walls here do not keep secrets, they only trap them." Eleanor ignored the talk, though a strange restlessness grew within her. She told herself it was pity, a governess's compassion for a man misunderstood by the world. Yet each time she saw him crossing the courtyard, tall and solitary in his dark coat, something in her heart betrayed her reasoning. The gossip reached the drawing rooms of nearby estates before long. Invitations to Wessex dwindled. Letters from London came laced with mockery. "The Duke entertains himself with philosophy now," one lord wrote to another. "A governess, they say, plain but clever. Perhaps intellect is the last refuge of the barren." One evening, as Eleanor passed through the west corridor, she heard laughter behind the half-open door of the salon. The Countess of Gainsford, visiting from London, was speaking to another guest. "Poor Miss Hart," the Countess said, her voice dripping with amusement. "She mistakes pity for affection. They say she dreams of becoming the next Duchess." Eleanor froze, her cheeks burning. She stepped back, but the carpet betrayed her with a soft rustle. The laughter ceased. The door swung open, and there stood the Duke. He looked from the Countess to Eleanor, his eyes dark as storm clouds. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, with quiet precision, he said, "It seems this house breeds ungracious guests." The Countess faltered, muttered something about jest, and withdrew. Eleanor stood motionless. He regarded her, his expression unreadable. At last he said, low enough for her alone, "You will learn, Miss Hart, that England's cruelty is most refined when spoken in whispers." And as he walked away, she felt the air around her shift, the first tremor of something neither of them yet dared to name, but both could feel awakening in the silence between their hearts. Winter deepened its hold upon Wessex Manor. The frost came early that year, sheathing the fountains and hedges in crystal, and the silence of the estate grew almost sacred. Yet within those frozen walls, something fragile had begun to thaw. The Duke, once a shadow moving through his own home, now lingered in rooms he had long neglected. The library fire burned later into the night, and the small salon, unused since his wife's passing, was lit again with candlelight. The change did not go unnoticed. Servants whispered that Miss Hart had accomplished what priests and physicians could not. She had coaxed a spark of life back into the Duke's soul. It began with questions. The Duke would find Eleanor in the schoolroom, surrounded by books and sketches, and ask after her lessons. He would stand near the window, hands clasped behind his back, and inquire about her reading, sometimes about philosophy, sometimes poetry. Once, when she spoke fondly of her father's love of Milton, his gaze softened. "He must have been a man of conviction," he said quietly. "Conviction," she replied, "is often mistaken for rebellion." A faint smile touched his lips. "Then we are both rebels, Miss Hart." His manner toward her was never improper, yet there was a tenderness in his restraint, a courtesy that felt almost reverent. On the 12th day of Advent, he invited her to the small salon for tea. It was an unexpected gesture, and though Eleanor hesitated, the steward's insistence left her little choice. When she entered, she found the fire already lit and a silver tray arranged with precision. The Duke rose from his chair, gesturing for her to sit opposite him. "It seemed unkind," he said, "to allow you to dine alone so often." The conversation that followed was quiet but strangely alive. He asked about her childhood, her studies, her opinions on the poets of the age. She answered with measured candor, but beneath her calm, she felt a stirring that frightened her, a warmth she had not known since girlhood. When she rose to leave, he held out a small object, a locket of silver etched with the crest of Wessex. Inside lay a pressed rose, dried and delicate. "It was taken from my wife's garden," he said, "a token of courage. I have no right to give it, but I find I must." Eleanor's fingers trembled as she accepted it. "I am not certain I possess such courage, your grace." "Perhaps not yet," he murmured, "but you have the soul of one who soon will." From that night onward, something unspoken bound them together. When they passed in the corridors, their eyes met briefly, politely, but with the gravity of those who share a secret neither can name. For Eleanor, the days grew heavier with longing and fear. She prayed for indifference and found none. She told herself that her affection was gratitude, nothing more. But gratitude does not make the heart race at the sound of footsteps on stone. London society, ever hungry for scandal, scented its prey. The Countess of Gainsford's gossip had reached beyond the shires, and now the tongue whispered of the Duke's philosopher governess. Anonymous notes began to arrive at Wessex, their handwriting elegant and cruel. One read, "It is not heirs he seeks, but distraction." The Duke ignored them, but Eleanor saw the tension in his shoulders, the way he lingered at the window, staring into the distance as if the horizon mocked him. In January, a royal ball was announced to celebrate the prince's recovery from illness. The Duke received his invitation reluctantly. He had not attended a gathering since his wife's death, yet the king's seal made refusal impossible. Eleanor prepared his niece for the occasion, sewing ribbons into the child's gown late into the night. "You must come too," the little girl pleaded. "You have never seen the chandeliers of Windsor." Eleanor smiled faintly. "A governess has no place among such lights, my dear." But when the Duke heard the child's request, he surprised them both. "Let her attend," he said. "A tutor's care deserves one evening of grace." Eleanor protested, but the decision was final. On the night of the ball, she wore a simple gown of blue silk, altered from her mother's old dress, its hem carefully mended. When she entered the ballroom, every gaze seemed to pause. The chandeliers scattered light across her hair, and though her attire lacked jewels, there was a quiet nobility in her bearing that no diamond could outshine. The Duke saw her from across the room, and, for a moment, forgot that the world existed. Their conversation was brief, polite, and perilous. "You're out of place here," he said softly. "I am aware," she replied, eyes downcast. "But it is a beautiful place to be misplaced in." Before he could answer, the Countess approached, a smile like a blade upon her lips. "Your Grace," she purred, "and Miss Hart. How unexpected. One might think the Wessex Library has found its muse." The words, sweetly poisoned, drew the attention of nearby guests. Laughter rippled like glass breaking. Eleanor felt the room tilt, her breath faltering. But the Duke did not retreat. His voice, calm yet ringing with authority, cut through the murmurs. "Miss Hart's dignity," he said, "is beyond your reach, madam. I suggest you remember yours." A stunned silence followed. The orchestra faltered. Whispers flared like wildfire. By dawn, the story had crossed the ballroom, the city, the kingdom. The Duke of Wessex defends his governess before the court. Some called it gallantry. Others called it madness. Days later, a newspaper appeared in London. The Duke of Wessex, childless, yet not loveless? The article dripped with insinuation, hinting that the once proud noble had taken solace in the arms of his servant. The scandal spread faster than truth could follow. Invitations ceased. Allies turned discreetly distant. Eleanor felt the weight of it in every glance. Servants bowed too deeply. Guests avoided her in corridors. Even the child she taught began to sense the change, asking, "Why do people speak your name so softly, Miss Hart?" Eleanor had no answer. That night, she resolved to leave Wessex. She wrote a letter of resignation and sealed it before dawn. But before she could send it, a knock sounded at her door. The Duke stood there, coat unbuttoned, face drawn but determined. You intend to go, he said. It is the only way to end this cruelty. Cruelty? His voice broke, not in anger, but in something near despair. They can have their words. I will not have your absence. Your Grace, if I stay, they will destroy you. He stepped closer, lowering his voice until it trembled. Miss Hart, they destroyed me long ago. You have only made me wish to live again. For a moment, neither moved. The candle between them flickered, throwing light across the silver locket at her throat. She wanted to speak, but could not. He turned away first, as if fearing what one more heartbeat might compel him to do. When the door closed, Eleanor pressed the letter to her chest and wept silently. She knew she could not leave, yet staying promised ruin. Somewhere beyond the frozen fields, dawn began to rise, a pale light over a kingdom already preparing its next whisper. The storm began just after dusk, sweeping across the moors and drumming against the windows of Wessex Manor with unrelenting fury. The wind howled through the chimneys like some restless spirit, and every corridor seemed to whisper of unfinished truths. In her chamber, Eleanor sat beside the fire, her half-written resignation still folded upon the desk. The ink had dried, but her resolve had not. For 3 nights, she had avoided the Duke, speaking only when duty required. The gossip had grown monstrous, spreading through London like a fever. She knew the longer she stayed, the more he would suffer for her presence. And yet, each time she thought of leaving, her heart recoiled as though from exile. When the knock came, it startled her. She expected the steward, perhaps the maid. Instead, it was the Duke himself, coat damp from rain, his eyes darker than the night behind him. "Forgive the hour," he said quietly, "but I could not let this storm end before I spoke what must be spoken." She rose at once, uncertain whether to bid him enter. "Your Grace, it is unseemly, so is silence," he interrupted, stepping inside. The door closed, muffling the tempest outside. He removed his gloves slowly, as if rehearsing calm he did not feel. "You mean to leave me?" he said. Her breath caught. "I cannot remain when my name is the weapon they use against you." "Let them speak," he replied. "They have whispered worse, and found no satisfaction in it. I have borne their pity for a decade. I will not bear their permission now." His voice trembled, not with weakness, but with a rare and dangerous honesty. She forced herself to meet his gaze. "You owe them your title, your standing. I am nothing, and they will not rest until they make you nothing too." He moved closer, the firelight glancing off his cheekbones, his expression solemn yet alive with a kind of desperation. "Do you think I measure my worth by their favor? I was dead to it long before you came. But when you entered this house, Miss Hart, I remembered the sound of life again. I remembered laughter, hope." He paused, his voice low. "And now you would leave me to the silence once more." Her heart pounded painfully. She turned toward the fire, unable to bear the weight of his eyes. "You mistake gratitude for affection," she whispered. "And I mistake affection for safety. It is neither. We are both prisoners of longing." The words hung between them like smoke. The Duke's composure faltered, and for the first time she saw the man behind the title. Not the stoic figure society mocked, but someone haunted by his own humanity. "You believe I seek comfort," he said, almost bitterly, "but I have sought only truth. You are the first person in years who has spoken to me as though I were not a monument to pity." He stepped nearer, his voice softening. "Do you not see, Eleanor? You have restored me." Her name on his lips struck her like an oath. She turned sharply. "Do not say that," she breathed. "It will undo everything." "Then let it be undone." She stared at him, searching for the line between courage and folly. His eyes, steady and grief-worn, held no pretense. He reached into his coat and drew a folded paper from his pocket. "Do you know what this is?" "A decree from the crown. They intend to reclaim Wessex upon my death, since I have no heir to inherit it. The bloodline ends, they say. The lands revert to the throne." Eleanor's gaze flickered over the document. "I had heard whispers." "Whispers," he said bitterly, "are the currency of our world. But they are wrong. My wife's death was not the end of me, nor of this house. You must understand something. He hesitated, his voice breaking into confession. "The physicians declare me barren. They said the blood of Wessex would never flow again. The king's men took my misfortune for proof of divine judgment. They call me cursed. I call it falsehood, yet I have come to accept it." She felt a strange ache within her, a pity that reached beyond compassion. "No man is cursed for grief, my lord. Then what am I if not cursed?" His words were fierce now, his restraint splintering. "They laugh because I cannot give England an heir, because I cannot fulfill the duty written into my birthright. They believe I am half a man." He took a step closer, his voice lowering. "But when I am near you, I remember what it is to feel whole again." Her eyes filled before she could stop them. "You must not say these things. Then tell me they are untrue." She opened her mouth, but no sound came. Instead, she felt his hand, hesitant, trembling, brush hers. The touch was brief, reverent, enough to set her heart alight and her reason aflame. "You should not," she whispered. "I already have." The storm raged louder beyond the windows, and the fire crackled between them like a warning. For a long moment neither moved. Then she lifted her hand, almost unconsciously, and touched his face. His breath caught, as though he had been struck. "Perhaps," she said softly, "destiny fears the wrong man." He leaned forward then, not with hunger, but with the careful wonder of one who has forgotten how to dream. Their lips met, not as scandal, but as surrender. The kiss was brief, almost sorrowful, as if both already mourned the peace they were breaking. When it ended, neither could speak. He turned away first, pressing his palms to the mantel. "Forgive me. I have dishonored your goodness." She shook her head. "You have only reminded me I am human." Days passed, heavy with unspoken truth. Eleanor kept to her duties, though her thoughts were no longer her own. She told herself it had been a moment of weakness, a mistake of the heart. Yet every time she closed her eyes, she felt again the trembling warmth of his hand in hers. The servants noticed her pallor, her distracted silence. Soon after, fever struck her, a sudden exhaustion that left her faint and trembling. The physician was called. He examined her, frowned, and returned the next morning with another doctor from the village. When they emerged from her chamber, their faces were pale with astonishment. The steward sought out the Duke at once. "Your Grace," he stammered, "Miss Hart is with child." The words hung in the air like thunder after lightning. The Duke's expression did not change. Only his hand closed around the chair beside him until the wood creaked. "That is impossible," he said quietly. "She has been unwell. There must be error." "There is no error, my lord. The child is strong. It is a miracle." The Duke's breath came shallow, disbelieving. A dozen thoughts collided. Fear, awe, hope he dare not feel. "No," he whispered, half to himself. "It cannot be." They said He stopped, then looked toward the stair where her chamber waited above. By the next day, London knew. Servants carried tales, messengers spread rumors, and soon the kingdom buzzed with scandal. "The barren Duke," they said, "has sown the impossible." To some it was proof of sin, to others, divine jest. But to the Duke of Wessex, it was something far more terrifying, proof that love had defied every decree written against him. Before the week ended, a royal summons arrived, sealed in crimson wax. He was ordered to appear before the king. The charge was not named, but the meaning was clear. The monarchy would not suffer a miracle it had not ordained. The winter of 1811 drew its last breath as the bells of Wessex Manor tolled beneath a sky of pale gold. Inside, silence reigned, the kind that comes not from peace but from awe. Eleanor lay pale but luminous, her dark hair damp against the linen pillows, and at her side, the Duke knelt as though before a relic divine. In his trembling hands rested a life, small, perfect, and breathing. The physician, with eyes wide and reverent, murmured what no one in the kingdom had dared believe possible. "It is a son, your grace." For a long moment, time itself seemed to hesitate, as though the world could not quite absorb the miracle it had witnessed. Then, slowly, as if realizing its own defeat, destiny bent its knee before them. Beyond the manor walls, The wind whispered through the barren rose gardens, carrying with it the faint hum of carriage wheels and gossip yet unborn. For already, in London drawing rooms and Windsor corridors, rumors would soon ignite, that the Baron Duke had defied nature, that the humble governess had borne the impossible. But here, within the tender cocoon of candlelight, titles and judgment ceased to matter. The Duke looked upon Eleanor not as the world would, not as scandal or sin, but as salvation. "You have given me back my name," he whispered, his voice breaking under the weight of reverence. "And my soul." Eleanor's eyes fluttered open, tired but alive with quiet triumph. "It was never lost," she said faintly, "only waiting for truth to find it again." Her hand found his, fragile yet sure, as though her strength lay not in her body but in the certainty of what they had endured. For in a world ruled by appearances, theirs had been the most dangerous rebellion of all, a love that had dared to exist without permission. Days turned to weeks, and the Duke's estate, once a mausoleum of broken lineage, began to stir with life. Servants walked with lighter steps. The halls filled again with the scent of baking bread and polished oak. Yet with renewal came peril. The monarchy could not remain silent. Letters sealed with the royal insignia began to arrive, polite in tone but sharpened with warning. The Crown's legal advisers hinted that questions might arise regarding the legitimacy of the child, given the scandal of the household. They urged the Duke to restore dignity through discretion, to send the governess away and preserve the appearance of noble restraint. The Duke read each letter in silence, the firelight flickering across his face. His fingers tightened around the seal until the wax cracked. "They would have me call my son a fabrication," he murmured, voice low as the storm brewing outside. Eleanor stood across the room, her gaze calm but wary, holding the infant swaddled in white. "Let them speak," she said. "Truth is not theirs to command." But he shook his head. "In England, my love, truth bends to the tongue of power, and I have defied it." That night, as snow returned to blanket the grounds, the Duke rode alone to Windsor. The corridors that once whispered of his ruin now glared with wary curiosity as he entered the royal audience chamber. There stood the monarch himself, aging, wary, and surrounded by courtiers whose faces bore masks of sympathy carved from disdain. The Duke bowed, every inch the gentleman of a bygone world. "Your Majesty," he began, "I have come not to defend myself, but to remind the kingdom that bloodlines are not forged by decree but by God's hand." Murmurs rippled. The monarch studied him, this man whom fate had mocked and now seemingly favored. "You asked the crown to bless a scandal," the king said coldly. The Duke met his gaze without flinching. "I asked the crown to recognize a miracle. England has no need of another tragedy. It needs hope, and it came, unexpectedly, through love unpermitted." There was silence, the kind that precedes either mercy or condemnation. Then, slowly the king rose. His eyes, clouded by age and memory, softened just enough to betray a glimmer of humanity. "Then let England have its miracle," he said quietly. "But do not forget, miracles make men uneasy. Guard it well." When the Duke returned to Wessex Manor at dawn, the snow had ceased, and sunlight fell upon the frozen fountain where roses would one day bloom again. Eleanor stood waiting at the door, her child in her arms. She saw the look in his eyes before he spoke, that mixture of exhaustion and victory known only to those who have stood before judgment and lived. He took her hand and pressed it to his lips. "We are no longer shadows," he said. "Let them write what they will, the truth will outlast ink." Years passed, and though the whispers never fully ceased, they softened, fading into legend. The governess who bore the Duke's heir became the Duchess of Wessex in all but name, and her son grew beneath the gaze of father who had learned that love, not lineage, defines a legacy. In portraits that would one day hang in halls and museums, she was always painted beside him, not in finery, but in grace, her gaze lifted toward the light. And long after their time had passed, when historians would recount the tale of the Baron Duke and the governess who defied fate, They would speak not of scandal, but of salvation. They would say that in an age ruled by pride, two hearts reminded England that miracles do not ask for permission. They simply arrive, unbidden, to humble kings and rewrite the meaning of power. For as the old narrator would whisper, standing before their weathered portrait, the kingdom mocked him, whispering he would never have an heir, until destiny mocked them back, and chose her as the mother of the miracle. And in that quiet defiance, love proved itself eternal, a crown no king could bestow, and no court could ever strip away.